9 years ago, I was at university up in Scotland reading philosophy and art history, which is the obvious way into a career in motoring journalism. And I was searching around for something to do my dissertation on. So after a lot of head scratching and time spent in the pub, I came up with what I still think is actually a very cool idea. I spent a year doing my dissertation on the BMW Art Cars. As part of the Olympics, because BMW are one of the sponsors, they've brought the entire collection, bar one, across to London. So we're going to have a look around. I can tell you a bit about what I wrote in my dissertation, and if you don't want to hear any arty stuff, just press the mute button and you can look at some very lovely pictures of some very lovely cars. I thought we'd start with this 3-litre CSL, partly because it's the very first BMW art car and partly because it's just one of my favourite cars. It's from 1975 and it was commissioned by a chap called Hervé Poulain, who was not only an auctioneer in Paris but also a gentleman racing driver, and he was going to drive this car at Le Mans. He phoned up BMW, said, "I've got this crazy idea. I want to cover it in the artwork of a friend of mine, Alexander Calder, who's an American sculptor known for sort of almost industrial-sized children's mobiles, frequently in the colours that you can see here." The idea of the car being a racing car being covered in art, I think, is very important as we go through the collection. After the success of the first art car in 1975, Hervé Poulain next year went back to Le Mans and he commissioned Frank Stella to cover another 3-litre CSL in the graph paper design, which is very cool. The year after that, 1977, we got this, the Roy Lichtenstein car, and I think it's probably one of my favourites. He's taken the idea of Le Mans and the scenery that it's going through day and night, so you get the sunset and sunrise on each side of the car. Plus he's used his distinctive Bendite dots and all the other sort of kind of motifs, these wavy lines, which you can think back to cartoons, which is what he used in his pop art, all used to determine the speed and portray speed on the car. I just think it looks really, really cool. We're now with what is a lot of people's favourite art car, the Andy Warhol BMW M1. It's a really interesting car because typical Warhol fashion is just extraordinary. Whereas most people tried to work with the car and thought about that, actually slightly like Calder, this is designed to deconstruct the car. It doesn't work with it in any sort of way. The shapes don't conform to it, and it's actually quite hard to almost look at it and reconcile what's painted on it with the form of the car itself. It works brilliantly when it's moving. It must have been amazing standing in the grandstands watching it go past at Le Mans. A couple of interesting stories about it. Warhol painted this himself. That was extraordinary because he was the master of the silkscreen, the factory, the idea of taking the artist's thumbprint out of an artwork. Whereas this, he came and he daubed with a brush. You can see his finger strokes in the paintwork itself, and he actually signed it in the back with his finger. So it's really completely different to almost every other artwork that he actually produced. When it was painted, BMW brought a camera crew along to film him painting it. Warhol turned up. 28 minutes later, he was done. The camera crew had seemed to take probably a day at least to paint it, and they weren't ready, so they missed the entire thing. As a thank you to the people that were helping him as well, he daubed his own signature on some of the paper that was on the floor. Whilst they all went out to chat later, cleaner came in, cleared the whole lot up. It was lost forever. After the amazing BMW M1 that Andy Warhol painted, the Art Car Collection came slightly more in-house from BMW. It became a bit more corporate. They decided that they wanted cars from painters all around the world. Hence you get things like this by Esther Malangu, who is from South Africa, which is obviously a very important market for BMW. However, although BMW got some very good artists, people like César Manrique and Robert Rauschenberg, to do art cars, I think the collection lost its way for one very simple reason. The cars they were painting weren't racing cars. They felt much more like they were designed to be seen static in a gallery. And whilst you can say some very interesting things about sort of the nature of cars and motor vehicles, if it's not moving, then the car's just a very odd-shaped canvas. Perhaps the only one of the static sort of 80s and 90s cars that really works is this, the Hockney car. Hockney famously actually really likes cars, and I think the interesting thing is that it's the sort of reverse of the Liechtenstein cars. So whereas that was reflecting what was on the outside, this is reflecting what's on the inside. You can see here probably a self-portrait of him sitting in the car, and famously one of his dogs sitting in the back seat. If you look on the bonnet as well, you can see the artist's impression of the engine and what's inside. After the slightly, I'd say, offbeat section of the 1980s, there was quite a gap, and then BMW came back to racing cars, and this is where I think the art collection got back on track, if you'll pardon the horrible pun. Jenny Holzer, the conceptual artist, did this V12 LMR, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. At the time I did my dissertation, this was the most recent car to be done. And as you can see on it, it's got various of her statements that she used to put on billboards and on t-shirts. A lot of people said it was to do with the racing car. I think it's actually to do with more the racing driver. Statements like lack of charisma can be fatal. And on the front you can see what I want, but if you look from above, it says save me from what I want. On the back of the headrest you've got what urge will save us now that sex won't. I think it's very much about the sort of person you have to be a racing driver, the lack of fear, the very single-mindedness. Monomania is mentioned in one of the quotes on the back, but you can also relate that to the car. However, the fact that each of the letters is mirrored in chrome means that when you look at them you can see yourself in them, which is why I think it's more to do with the racing driver than the car. After the Holzer car there was a bit of a blip. It's the one car that's not here because it's covered in ice and needs its own refrigeration unit. All a bit weird. However, after that, we're back again to what the Art Car Collection does best, a Le Mans car. And it just looks absolutely brilliant. Clearly designed to be seen in motion, and it has that wonderful juxtaposition which the very early cars, the 3-litre CSLs and that 320 Group 5 Roy Liechtenstein car has, of something that's brutally functional but with art then on top of it, and I love that juxtaposition. This is by Jeff Koons, and yeah, at first it looks just like a stripy car, but I'll leave you this thought. Being Koons, it's got quite a sexual connotation, and although BMW don't publicise it, if you look on top you'll see exactly what each of these stripes mean to represent.